This is our second video on Renaissance politics and economics. Last video we talked about the new urban elite. Many local nobles moved from rural homes into the growing cities in Italy. There, the merchants and the nobles merged in many ways through economic partnerships, political alliances, intermarriage, and so forth. They created the new urban elite that differed from feudal system and more it differed from the feudal system that most of Europe was in. We also talked about Italian city-states that came into conflict with one another in many ways. The struggles for control over trade routes, the struggle for natural resources and to access seaports. They fought over territory or when one city-state seemed to be too powerful. They also competed socially and culturally to who can make the best art, music, and architecture. So let's start with Milan, one of the largest, most important city-states. Located in northern Italy, Milan became one of the richest and most powerful of the Italian city-states, due in large part to the fact that it lay at the juncture of several important trade routes. Its rulers also established an effective tax system that helped the city remain prosperous. In the 14th century, Milan came under the rule of the Visconti family, who became the city-state's first ruling dynasty. In the early 1300s, the Viscontis embarked upon a quest for territorial expansion, using a variety of means, mostly peaceful, such as purchasing or negotiating. They used these means to gain control over other cities and smaller city-states. Milan eventually came to encompass much of northwestern Italy and even came close to conquering Florence in the 1400s. So when you think Milan, think the Visconti family and their expansion to take over most of northern Italy. Sforza. In the mid-15th century, the last of the Visconti rulers died without leaving an heir. The dynasty ended. Milan briefly established a republic and hired a group of condottieri. Remember the mercenaries from last lecture? They hired a group of mercenaries, condottieri, or the mercenaries, led by a man named Francisco Sforza, to defend the city against potential attacks by Venetian forces. Sforza had worked for the Viscontis before, providing defense for Milan on several earlier occasions. But this time, he used the opportunity to attack the city and seize power. The Sforzas would become Milan's ruling dynasty for almost a century. Francisco Sforza's takeover prompted Venice to declare war on Milan. The war saw a shift in traditional alliances between city-states. Florence, in the past, had a long-standing alliance with Venice. In this conflict, however, Cosimo de Medici, the Florentine ruler, chose to support Milan. Naples continued to support Venice. The war ended with the Peace of Lodi in 1454, in which Venice agreed to recognize Sforza as Duke of Milan in exchange for some minor territories. The Peace of Lodi also served as an informal non-aggression pact between the four main city-states involved in the war, and a period of relative stability ensued that would last for nearly 40 years. Francisco Sforza ruled until his death in 1466. The next great Sforza ruler, Ludovico, sometimes known as Ludovico the Moor, took over in 1480. Though all the Sforzas were great patrons of the arts, Ludovico was the most prominent, making extensive use of his position as one of the wealthiest and most powerful princes of Italy to provide support for some of the most famous artists and architects of the Renaissance. With his wife, Beatrice d'Este, he held a brilliant court and spent immense sums of money to further the arts and sciences. He is remembered especially for his patronage, or that means support, of Leonardo da Vinci and the architect Donato Bramante. After helping Charles VIII of France invade Naples, he was forced out of Milan by Louis VII in 1499. One of his sons, Francisco II, was restored to the Duchy of Milan and was the last in the male line. So, let's talk about Venice. We've been talking about Milan, it's northern Italy. Let's move to Venice. The city-state of Venice, bordering the Adriatic Sea in northeast Italy, was a major center of trade, due both to its key geographic location and the special trading privileges Venetian merchants were able to secure from the Byzantine and German emperors. By the time of the Renaissance, the city was the main trade crossroads between the Eastern world and Western world, supplying most of Italy, Germany, and France with goods from Asia and the Middle East. Venice had begun as a republic in the 6th century AD, with an elected ruler called a doge, who oversaw several lesser officials. By the time of the Renaissance, however, the doge had become little more than a figurehead, no real power. Real political power in the Renaissance Venice lay with a merchant oligarchy. Remember, oligarchy means a rule of a few powerful people. Some 200 merchant families dominated Venice's great council and controlled the city's government. As a crucial seaport, Venice developed not only a strong merchant fleet of ships, but a powerful navy as well. So, just to compare quickly Milan to Venice, Milan had a dynasty, a duke, a single family that ruled. Venice had many families and a great consul. Many merchant families ruled Venice. Very different city. War between Venice and Genoa. Venetian merchants zealously protected their hard-won trade and struck hard at any potential rivals. When the city-state of Genoa began to encroach on some of Venice's trade routes, as you can see in the maps in the slide, Venice declared war on Genoa, so the war was over the trade routes. The city-states fought sporadically throughout most of the 14th century, with Venice finally emerging victorious in 1381. After its defeat, Genoa declined as a major trading power, while Venice went on to become the greatest trading center in Europe, the 15th century. In the 15th century, Venice began to attempt to expand to the Italian mainland, which brought it into conflict with other Italian city-states, especially Milan, which bordered it to the west. Venice and Milan went to war in 1450, though neither emerged victorious. Venice did gain some territory. By 1500, Venice controlled a significant portion of northern Italy. In the 13th century, Venice had managed to get Frankish soldiers on the Fourth Crusade to attack and conquer Constantinople. Venice subsequently established a commercial colony there and gained control of the trade routes of the Byzantine Empire. Venice used its position in Constantinople to dominate commerce between Europe and Asia up through the middle of the 15th century. In 1453, however, the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople and destroyed the Venetian colony there. The Ottomans continued to fight with the Venice to continue to fight with Venice up through the 16th century, capturing many areas the Venetians had controlled and gradually weakening Venice's position as the prime center of trade in Europe. All right, so we've talked about Milan, we've talked about Venice, we'll talk about Florence now. Florence, located slightly north of the center of the Italian peninsula, grew wealthy and powerful as a center of banking and a manufacturer of textiles, clothing. Though the city became known for producing some of the finest woolen cloth in Europe, it gained greater renown as Europe's premier financial center. Florentine bankers transacted all financial business for the Vatican, that's the Pope, and because of this, popes often granted the city special privileges in other areas as well. Florence became so successful as a financial center that it was able to issue the gold florin, a coin that became a widely recognized and respected international medium of currency. So the florin from Florence became like the common currency of Europe and trade in Africa and the Middle East. Florence functioned as a commune in the 12th century, and by the time of the Renaissance, the city state was officially a republic. By the late 14th century, however, the city had come to be controlled by an oligarchy of wealthy bankers and merchants. Even so, the city still clung to Republican ideals. The Medici. The Medici family, which had made its fortune in banking, effectively controlled the government of Florence for much of the 15th century. The first great ruler from this family dynasty was Cosimo de' Medici, who assumed power in 1434 and held it until his death in 1464. Though Cosimo Medici firmly held the reins of authority, he wisely chose to exercise that authority in a behind the scenes fashion, so as to preserve the appearance that Florence was a republic. He held no formal title as ruler, didn't lead an extravagant lifestyle, and didn't publicly flaunt his power. Cosimo de' Medici also established the Medici's reputation as Italy's premier patrons of the arts, supporting notable figures like the sculptor Donatello and the painter Fra Angelico. He also funded several important building projects in Florence, including the construction of Brunelleschi's dome of Florence Cathedral. He founded the first public library in Europe at the monastery of San Marco. Lorenzo de Medici. Cosimo's grandson was Lorenzo, and who assumed power in 1469 at the age of 20. Like his grandfather, Lorenzo held absolute power. He also continued Cosimo's tactic of exercising that power mostly from behind the scenes. Lorenzo proved to be an even greater supporter of the arts than Cosimo had been, and was himself an accomplished poet. Renaissance author Niccolò Machiavelli called him the greatest patron of literature and art that any prince has ever been. He was also very popular among the people of Florence, who called him Lorenzo the Magnificent. Yet not everyone loved the Medici. Some prominent Florentine merchant families resented the Medici domination. In 1478, an event known as the Pazzi Conspiracy unfolded. Pope Sixtus IV had wanted to end the Medici rule of Florence and replace it with his nephew, Girolamo Riaro. With the indirect encouragement from the Pope, members of the Pazzi and Salviati families, Florentine banking rivals of the Medici, planned to assassinate Lorenzo de Medici and his brother, Giuliano. On April 26, 1478, the conspirators managed to kill Giuliano and only wounded Lorenzo Medici, who escaped. Upon learning of the attempt on Lorenzo's life, enraged Florentine crowds hunted down and killed the conspirators. After the failure of the Pazzi conspiracy, the Pope enlisted Naples, its traditional ally, to attack Florence. Fighting went on through 1479, with Florence gradually weakening. In December of that year, Lorenzo decided to go to Naples and negotiate directly with the Neapolitan king. This risky diplomatic move paid off. Naples and Florence came to a settlement in February 1480 that ended the war. From then until Lorenzo's death in 1492, Florence enjoyed a period of peace. Savonarola were the most famous people. Florence in the 1490s came under the influence of a Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola. Sorry for the pronunciation. Savonarola had begun to make a name for himself at the monastery of San Marco by preaching against what he characterized as the sinfulness and immorality of life in Florence. He especially criticized the Medici family as corrupt, extravagant, and even pagan because of their support of artists who created secular works. His words struck a chord with many who were tired of the Medici's domination of Florence, and he began to win many followers. After Lorenzo Medici's death in 1492, his son Piero took over. Unlike his father and grandfather, Piero was neither a wise nor an effective ruler. After Piero surrendered Florence to the invading French king Charles VIII in 1494, the Florentine citizenry rose against the Medici, drove them from the city, and established a new constitution that, while democratic in form, also incorporated many of Savonarola's religious ideas. From this point, Savonarola in effect ruled Florence. Under Savonarola, life in Florence became much more strict and pious. There were even special police officers charged with enforcing morality. In 1497, Savonarola and his followers carried out the infamous bonfire of the vanities, confiscating luxury items, books of immoral writers and pagan works of art. They burned them in a huge pyre in the city's Piazza della Signoria, so the center of town. Savonarola's downfall was due to his conflict with Pope Alexander VI and his refusal to obey orders from Rome. In 1497, he was excommunicated, kicked out of the church. In April 1498, the citizens of Florence, fed up with his repressive regime, attacked the San Marco monastery, hanged Savonarola, and burned his body. Those are some of the famous and powerful rulers of Italian city states we covered today. From Milan to Venice to Florence,